Hi, welcome back to the 8th week of Consider This, the virtual series where we decode COVID. I'm Marianne McDowell.
And I'm Heidi Beidinger. And this evening, we're going to be talking about testing strategies. And our guests today are Liz Rulli, who's an Associate Vice President of Research, and Dr. Paul Hergenother, who is a professor of chemistry at the University of Illinois. And we're going to introduce them shortly. But first, as always, just a reminder about why it is that we're doing this webinar. It was really important to Marianne and I that we help contribute to our community's understanding of the public health and the science of COVID.
We hope that you're finding the information that we're providing helpful and informative, and letting others know what you learn. If you didn't check out this week's tutorials, we have several on the different kinds of testing procedures and how they work. So please look them up. And as if I mentioned every week, the views that you hear on this podcast or this virtual series are the views of Heidi and myself and our guests, and not explicitly the views or policies of the University of Notre Dame, unless they're stated as such. And any health information that you hear, we're just trying to give you more information, and it shouldn't substitute for the specific health advice from your own practitioner.
Awesome. As we tell you every week, we have all of our webinars on the ThinkND website. So if you missed last week's conversation with Sheriff Redmond and Deborah Stanley, it is there. It was a super interesting conversations about how and what we are doing to keep jails and the recently released safe from COVID. It's quite a complex situation, and it was a really interesting talk. So again, if you missed it, don't worry. It's on our ThinkND page. So now here we are in week 8 of our series, which Marianne, I can't believe we've made it to week 8.
We're almost on the home stretch.
Oh my gosh. And of course, to tell our audience too, this is holiday break officially. So our students have completed their coursework, and officially our students are on holiday this week. So we wish them well, because it's been a challenging semester. So week 8, let's introduce our guests. Let's welcome our guests to the show.
Cue for the guests. Hey, Liz. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Liz.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Okay, so I'm going to just take a few minutes just to introduce our wonderful guests. I have a little bio to read about each of you that highlights all the fabulousness of both of you. So Liz Rulli is appointed as the Associate Vice President for Research with an emphasis on research administration, and she leads all research-related aspects of pre- and post-award operations, and is also responsible for the financial and administrative affairs of all the units reporting to Notre Dame Research. Liz has more than 20 years experience in university and research administration. And prior to joining Notre Dame Research, Liz was the Director of Financial Affairs for the Vice President for Research at Purdue University. Liz has a Bachelor's of Science in Management and a Master's of Science in Management for Purdue University. Awesome. And our other guest tonight, Paul Hergenother, is the Kenneth L. Reinhardt Endowed Chair in Natural Products and Professor of Chemistry at the University of Illinois. Paul received his BS in chemistry from the University of Notre Dame in 1994. He went on to the University of Texas at Austin and obtained his PhD in 1999. After an American Cancer Society postdoc fellowship at Harvard University, he joined the faculty at the University of Illinois in 2001, where his lab works to discover and translate novel anti-cancer and antibacterial compounds. 4 anti-cancer compounds discovered in his lab have been licensed for development, including PAC1, which has been moved to clinical trials through a startup company, Vanquish Oncology, that is founded by Dr. Hergenother. So welcome, both of you.
Thanks, great to be here.
Great to have you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for coming and talking to us about COVID today. I mean, clearly you both have other lives other than COVID, based on those bios. And as Liz said earlier, that's what she does at night. She does COVID all during the day and her regular job at night. So at the beginning of each session, we ask our guests to tell a little bit about how you got where you are and what you do. And maybe give us a fun fact about yourselves. Liz, can you start?
Sure. So my whole career has been, I've worked at universities and in university and research administration. So I'm a business person who loves to work with researchers. And so what I've really enjoyed in that is that I can take the skills that I have and help our really brilliant researchers and scientists do what they're really good at and get some of that administrative noise out of the way for them. So that's really sort of how I fit in. Um, as far as a fun fact, we'll talk more about our COVID saliva collection, but we started in a tent, a tailgate tent on the North Quad, and then we moved when it started getting cold into our field house, our Joyce ACC. And when I grew up in South Bend, and I got my first job out of high school or in high school, I worked in the JACC when the hockey arena was there. And so that was my very first job in high school, was working in the JCC, selling concessions at the hockey games. And now I'm back many, many years later. I've come completely full circle, and I'm in the JCC collecting saliva for COVID testing. So
Yeah, I remember when the hockey matches were there and that little concession stand back in the corner.
yep, that was me.
Very intimate setting. Paul, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great introduction. Thanks so much for that, Heidi. I kind of got here because of, great instructors I had at the University of Notre Dame, Professor Brad Smith and Paul Helquist, Marv Miller, and others that are no longer there, really taught me that chemistry can be used to make a very positive difference and impact on society and the world. So I'm really grateful for all my training there. For a fun fact, since I'm talking to a Notre Dame audience, I'm sure you are familiar with the field storming from a couple of weeks ago after the win against #1 Clemson. So a fun fact about me is that when NBC shows the clip from the last time Notre Dame beat #1, 1993 against Florida State, you can see me running across the field.
That's excellent. And was your daughter storming the field this last week?
She said she did, yes.
He says very quietly.
It was very, very exciting, although a lot of us were like, are you wearing a mask?
I know. All right, so let's move to rumors.
Yeah, I think I want to do an email first.
Please, go ahead.
We got some questions, and I thought I wanted to address one of them before we get started. This is from Derek, and he asks, how many of the molecular tests administered are followed with a serological test to ensure the sickness a student experiences is truly from SARS-CoV-2? And so I just wanted to remind our participants of the different kinds of tests that are available. So there's a molecular test, which looks for the nucleic acid in the virus, which we call PCR, and that's sort of the gold standard and what a lot of we'll be talking about today. There's also an antigen test that, at least at Notre Dame, looks for the nucleocapsid antigen. And in general, you can think of that as if a person's positive is when they're infectious. And then there are serological tests, and serological tests are looking for antibodies. And so usually, or not always, but you can have antibodies for a long time, even when you aren't having virus any longer. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we were a little unsure if people would always have antibodies if they were infected. But I think in general now we're thinking that is probably true. And so if you have a positive PCR test, most likely you're going to have antibodies as well. And so it might not, in my personal opinion, is that that's not necessarily that useful. And I don't think Notre Dame is doing any serological testing, and I don't know about the University of Illinois. Paul or Liz?
Yeah, I mean, we've come to that same conclusion that you have. I mean, we can talk about this more later when we talk about positives and false positives. For us, really, false positives are the enemy. And, we amplify 3 genes because of that, and we retest every saliva sample that is positive. The serological result is not really actionable in any way. So while we've done that on a handful of cases, we don't routinely do that.
Same with us. The only recently, as our students were exiting, I think there's at least one country that required the antibody test, and we have helped some students get that in order to go home, but we're not using it as part of our regular process.
All right, great, thanks. You want to go to the rumor?
Yeah, great question though. Yeah, let's go to Rumor Has It. So this is a segment where we bring forth a rumor or a myth that Marianne and I are hearing in the community, either from students or from family. And so this week we've heard a rumor that goes like this. That the University of Notre Dame is planning on doing pooled surveillance testing in the spring. And then if the pool tests are positive, that all individuals in the pool will be called in for additional testing. Liz, can you explain to us what pool testing is and how it works?
Sure, and actually we heard some rumors too that we were already doing it in the fall, which was also is not true. We may spend some time looking at that over the break, but pool testing is when you combine samples from multiple individuals before you run your testing. And if the whole pool is negative, you can feel confident that group is negative. If you have a positive result, then you'll go back and individually test the samples. Most folks that are pooling, I think, are doing around pools of 4 or 5. But we don't just assume that everyone in the pool is positive. We would retest and only identify those that are positive within that.
So Liz, can I just follow up? You mean when you retest the sample you already collected?
Yes, we don't have to, right, and we don't have to collect an additional sample.
And what is the benefit of doing pool testing? Why would we choose to do that?
So it depends on how your lab is set up. If you are limited by the number of PCR machines, it can help your throughput. That's not the case for us. It would reduce, it might extend our capacity a little bit. It is more cost effective.
If the numbers are low.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, you'd have to be running them twice, right? If your numbers are high, yeah.
Right.
And Paul, are you doing pool testing?
No, we don't do pooling, and we've gone through the same analysis. We've experimented with it. We consider it and still considering it. For us, really, the priority is to get results back rapidly. Pooling is a complication on the front end and also typically on the back end. So it does save costs definitely, but it also does slightly, depending on how you do it, reduce your sensitivity. So we've elected not to pool.
All right. We've heard it here, Marianne. We now know. Yep. We're not moving towards pool testing. All right, so let's talk about this week's data. And of course, another week it has been. The pandemic is not slowing down. So let's just talk about a few things that have been happening here in St. Joe County. So we reached another milestone in terms of the number of average new cases that we're experiencing. Over the weekend, we hit a new high of 4,084 new positive cases here in St. Joe County. And to get a sense, that we have doubled that, we were 3 weeks ago, we had half that number. So we've doubled inside of 3 weeks. And when we started tracking this data, that was early September, we had 40. We were averaging 40 cases per week, and now we're over 4,000. So we've gone up 10 times in that amount of time. So, setting records again and again, right? Not nice records though. The other thing too is for our audience to know is that while maybe 4,000 doesn't sound like a lot to some people, I think that this next part will really exemplify what that 4,000 is translating into in terms of what's happening in our community. Both of our hospitals have now confirmed that they have had to buy refrigerated semi-trucks. And this is in anticipation of having to house the bodies of people who are passing from COVID-19. And then finally, this past week, St. Joe County was able to pass a mask ordinance. And while it is not as strong as we had hoped it to be, the health department will have a tool in their toolbox to be able to fine businesses between $50 and $250 for lack of compliance. So that's the data that's happening here in St. Joe County. And now I'd like to hear more about the data here at Notre Dame from Liz, and then of course from Illinois, from Paul. So perhaps Paul, if you could go first and just tell us about, how many tests you completed, how many are positive, kind of what's happening by the numbers in Illinois.
Sure. On campus, we've done close to 900,000 tests this semester. So we mandate that all undergraduates get tested twice a week. And so that's about 10,000 a day, a little bit over 10,000 a day, and 5,000 on the 2 weekend days. So 60 to 70,000 a week. When you do this, you can really see positivity drop in the population. And we've seen that. You can see that on our own dashboard. Our positivity is now about 0.35%. And most importantly, we've had no spread to our larger community that some other big schools have had.
That's quite impressive. Those numbers are astounding. 900, you're almost at 1 million tests, and testing students twice a day for the students who are listening, or twice a week rather, so sorry, twice a week for each student. That's a stunning feat. Liz, what are we doing here at Notre Dame? What's our testing schedule look like?
We have tested through the semester. Our surveillance tests are about 73,000, so much smaller scale. But we have gotten to a point where we are able to test, the students about once a week, and also our high contact staff and faculty about every other week. And so we've been ramping up to that over the course of the semester. We got a little bit later start than they did at Illinois. And we also, one thing we did a little bit differently is we have used some capacity in commercial tests that we had available to us to augment as we were getting our saliva lab up. We've used both commercial nasal swab tests and the saliva test for our surveillance program.
Wow, awesome.
It's definitely a lot of tests. I wonder if any of you sleep. All right, so I think that brings us to our headlines. And again, there's tons to choose from. So I chose 3 headlines for this week. Well, I'll start with the first 2, and then we can have a little discussion, and then I'll follow up with the third one. So these 2 articles were both from November 20th. Yep. One was in the New York Times. Actually, both were in the New York Times, but the one that I'm going to highlight here is the title is "After a COVID Semester, the University of Michigan Gets Tougher on the Virus." And the other one was highlighted in the New York Times, but it also came out in the CDC MMWR. And that's implementation of a pooled surveillance testing program for asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infections on a college campus, Duke University. And so basically the difference between these 2 articles is, so at Duke, they had a little over 10,000 students, and they tested the students about 70,000 times, and they only had 84 positives. Interestingly, half of them were asymptomatic, and I think there's a question later that we can talk about asymptomatics. And then in Michigan, they had over 2,500 cases compared to Duke, and so they had a different kind of protocol. And I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about the differences in the approaches of these 2 universities. I don't know, Paul, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Every university has had their own approach this semester. Duke chose to make very dramatic changes to their housing, as you may know. Only freshmen and sophomores on campus, all in single occupancy rooms. So this, combined with the frequent testing you mentioned, really helped them to limit the spread. University of Michigan, they publicly said early on they did not think that frequent repeat testing was possible on a campus like theirs. So they really had very limited testing, maybe a couple thousand a week.
So they didn't test hardly at all. And so, so do you think that made it, how do their test results, because they have about the same size student body as Illinois, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, they had positivity of 2% or so for multiple weeks. And then, they just recently announced they're not going back to in-person classes for their next semester. So they've been having some struggles.
Yeah, do you think it's possibly even the numbers that they're showing, because they're not testing very much,
Right.
so that they probably, and if in the case of the Duke study, they're saying, and multiple studies are saying about half,
Yeah.
40 to 50% are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. There's a difference there, but really they might have a lot more cases than they know about.
Yeah, of course. That's why, really to control the pandemic, you really need to test everybody because of exactly what you're saying. 50% of the spread is from asymptomatic people.
So Liz, what's the plan for the university in the spring? We're going to try to ramp up to do students once a week,
Yeah,
or
we're looking at even increasing our capacity further so that we can do more frequent testing in the spring.
awesome. Okay, so here is my third headline, and this one was from yesterday, I think, in the Chicago Tribune. As COVID-19 cases surge, U.S. testing systems struggle to keep up with the demand. It's like a dog chasing its tail. And one of the points the article made was testing is delayed because of shortages of key supplies that will likely continue to more delays. So are either of campuses having some problems with supply chain and getting the reagents that you need?
Go ahead, Liz, if you want to.
No, I was saying we haven't had problems with the reagents. It's the other things you wouldn't expect, like pipette tips that are that make me nervous.
Yeah, like how many pipette tips do you go through in a week? I mean, it must be like
Wow.
hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, they can be hard to come by these days, and the lab has had to shift and work with some different sizes and some different things that maybe aren't their preference. Just to get through, we've put some standing orders in place to try to secure the supply chain, but everybody's looking for the same consumables.
Yeah, and for our participants, a pipette tip is a little plastic piece that you put on the end of the piece of equipment you use to transfer the liquids into different things. And so then you throw that away so that you don't have any contamination. And what about you, Paul? Do you guys have any issues?
I mean, not really. I mean, we'll probably discuss the genesis of our testing before, but or later. But in April, when we started developing our tests, we knew that this could be a big problem, and so we explicitly excluded things that would be supply chain limiting, and the few things that we did need, we guaranteed supply chain with those vendors. So it hasn't been a big problem. As Liz mentioned, if you have flexibility with respect to what types of tips and things you can use on the different instruments, that's very helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys were kind of ahead of the curve planning for this.
Sounds like it.
So the other thing that article brought up to me is, can universities help with the problems in testing in their communities? And is either university doing this, or have you been approached by various communities?
Yeah, so we've launched a spin out called Shield T3 to bring the saliva test to beyond our campus. And it has what it does is it's built mobile labs, so labs on a truck, literally on an 18-wheeler. So, and these are being deployed all over the country. So one that's been announced is at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our Shield T3 is doing all their testing for them next semester, something close to 10,000 a day. There's another truck that's been completed that is here in Champaign-Urbana, and there's a lot of discussions and hope that it'll be used for local testing starting early next year.
Paul, can I ask a follow-up question? We've talked about, building up capacity and getting high throughput laboratories. How are you able to get 10,000 tests done on the back end of a semi-trailer, right?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. It's purposefully built for this. So our lab has been probably, just like Liz, retrofitted for COVID testing, right? So it's a number of different rooms and maybe not optimal. Whereas the truck, we have everything. You start here and then it goes here and it goes here. So it has it's basically a replica of our lab, but kind of in an optimized workflow. So it hasn't been an issue.
And how many of these trucks do you have?
There's about 5 that have been built, and they're built as customers approach us. And so that, as you can imagine right now, the demand is quite high. So kind of they're kicking up the production of them.
That's unbelievable. Ingenuity, right? During this pandemic. That's been the interesting thing about hosting this webinar is that, we hear the grim side of things, but then we also hear about all this ingenuity and creativity, innovation that's going on, and certainly testing, putting a laboratory on the back end of a semi truck is amazing and ingenious.
Yeah.
So should we, so Paul, you already referenced it, let's talk maybe about the origin story of how did things get started at University of Illinois? Who had this idea to get this thing off the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we were shut down in March, like everybody. And I think, a lot of us were really interested in some of the concepts out there, like the NBA had this testing bubble, right? And that would work very well for them. I was kind of communicating with various people around the idea of testing everybody. I mean, back then, for a safer return and in-person classes, we recognized that we would need to test a lot of people. And my colleague, Marty Burke, here in chemistry, was able to push this forward through our administration. And in late April, they gave us the green light to try it. And of course, there was no suitable test available, none that could be done fast and free of supply chain limitations and frequently repeatable and inexpensive. So in early May, I led a team of just really outstanding researchers whose goal is to develop this new test that we could deploy on a massive scale. Saliva made a lot of sense to us, right? We're all wearing masks because of how we're spreading this, and it bypasses supply chain bottlenecks. And we knew we needed to still make it better and bypass a key one with respect to RNA purification. So we kind of gave ourselves 6 weeks to do this. One key part was standing up the CLIA lab on our campus because really to get a turnaround time that we wanted, basically at our university, every hour, our samples are transported down to this CLIA lab where they're processed. So we get results back in about 5 to 12 hours. And so my colleague, Tim Fan, remarkably did this in a very short amount of time using our existing veterinary diagnostic lab. So, we had success by the end of May, and one of the first people I communicated with outside of UIC was actually Paul Bona, my colleague, professor of chemistry and chemical engineering at Notre Dame. He was here for my first few years here. We were colleagues together, and I kind of kept him posted on our progress over the summer, and he must have pushed it up the food chain at Notre Dame. So really happy to see Notre Dame's success with it.
Hey, Paul, I just wanted to follow up. You mentioned CLIA. Can you tell us what that stands for, what it means, what's the relevance here?
Yeah, it's a clinical lab improvement amendment. So it's the process. If you are doing diagnostic testing, which means you're reporting a result back to a patient saying you have this or you don't have that, you need to do it under what's called a CLIA lab, which means it has a certain amount of certifications. There's an inspection process and all of that. And so we wanted to use a CLIA lab, and so standing that up and getting through all those that regulatory was a whole team that did that, and that's how we're doing our testing now.
I think that most people would assume that all universities have CLIA labs. Is that true? I
mean, no, it's not true, but some might have small ones in their health center, but they couldn't process 10,000 samples a day, right? So we built a separate one in our what was previously part of the veterinary diagnostic lab. And so that diagnostic lab already had a lot of the things with respect to record keeping, training of personnel, process, standard operating procedures, and all of that you need for CLIA certification. So they were able to convert to a human COVID testing lab relatively quickly.
So how does that, the mobile trucks?
Yep, they're CLIA certified as well.
Okay, wow.
I have just one more follow-up question. Paul, you said that you and your team recognized that you needed to test a lot of people very early on. And then you went right on to say that we got busy, and 6 weeks later, we're standing up all of this, and you did a tremendous amount of work. and sort of glossed over, you realized you had to test a lot of people, but plenty of other universities didn't recognize that. Like, what was the thinking? Why does one university recognize that as an important piece and another university might say, we don't have to do as much testing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it was pretty well recognized, and we had our own modelers and bioinformatics people and others outside of our university have shown that really frequency of testing is more important even than limit of detection, right? So if you could test every day, for example, that's kind of the way out of this. And other people have said that testing twice a week is really good because of the incubation period of the virus. The insidious part of it is just because I'm negative now, I could have got it yesterday, and it won't show up as positive until 2 days from now, right? And so that's where the repeat frequent testing comes into play, and really compelling compliance with that, which we can talk about, was a real key part of making it work here.
Wow. So Liz, you want to talk about Notre Dame's origin story and how we got started and how the testing strategies evolved?
Sure. Actually, our origin story starts with Paul and the University of Illinois, and we couldn't have done any of this without their wonderful help. And the timing was really perfect. At the end of July, the university said, we want to embark on a surveillance testing program. Through Paul Bone's help, he introduced us to Paul. And I think it was when you were coming to drop your daughter off at Notre Dame that you met with us for the first time, and really very generously shared with Notre Dame all of the SOPs and the process and what Illinois was doing. And we were able to just really leapfrog. And within about a week from that meeting, had laid a plan out for university administration about how we would do a surveillance testing program using the University of Illinois methods. So yeah, we stood our lab up then in about 6 weeks from that point, and we never would have gotten there without Paul's help.
It's quite a story. How many universities have approached you, Paul, and the University of Illinois, and how many have replicated?
I mean, I've been in contact with probably over 50 different universities. Many of them are doing this, or some kind of part of this blueprint. Basically, saliva testing with an on-campus lab is, really a great way to get rapid turnaround.
Yeah. Wow, fantastic. A service to the country.
I hope.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Paul, can you talk a little bit about how you're compelling the students to come in twice a week? And then I'll follow up with that with Liz.
Yeah. I mean, we have an amazing team of computer scientists and app developers here. So they develop what's called the Safer in Illinois app that we all have on our phones. And this shows your status, meaning if you've had a recent negative test, then you have a cleared status on your phone. And we have people at all of and so we have some in-person classes, and we have people at all those buildings checking to make sure that you have a cleared status on the phone. So you're not allowed into the buildings unless you have a cleared status, meaning you've had a recent negative test. So really the combination of having in-person classes and this app, which everybody has, and you get your result back through the app as well. It tells you that you're negative, and then you show it to get into the building. And so, we haven't had any problem with compliance. In fact, people, as kind of the semester is gone and they see what else is out there and positivity rising all around us, students get tested more and more frequently, and so do staff. I mean, it's a luxury to be able to get a free, fast test any day of the week, right?
Yeah. And how are we doing it at Notre Dame, Liz?
So we don't have that same slick app, but I really like to move to that model for the spring semester, and I really like a lot about what Illinois has done in that regard. We've had pretty good compliance throughout the semester without the app. But as we got near the end of the semester, we put some more incentives in, especially for the students, to be tested in advance of the Clemson game. And then the exit testing also was a requirement that we wanted to ensure that all the students before they departed got an exit test. So we had a few more requirements than we did at the beginning of the semester.
Yeah, just to follow up on that for our audience, if you didn't know, all this, to be able to go to the Clemson game, the students had to have a test and be negative. And if they didn't come in for their test, then their tickets were revoked. So even though they stormed the field, hopefully they were all negative at that time. And also on the exit testing, something was put in place where they can't register unless they get exit tested. Do you know what the compliance is, Liz?
Oh, compliance has been over 99%. Yeah, we're down to just a couple dozen.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. So something I wanted to follow up when we were talking about CLIA. Where is Notre Dame CLIA certified, or if not, are we planning on that, or what are we going to do going forward?
Yeah, so actually, we did not have an existing CLIA lab or a veterinary lab like Illinois and some others have. And so we have been operating, and Health and Human Services really encourage universities to test even without that CLIA certification. What that means is you can't give a diagnostic result to the individual. So what we've done is we've done all of our testing. If there's a reason to believe coming out of that testing that someone is positive, then we immediately get them into a confirmatory diagnostic test using one of the clinical or the commercial tests that we have available to us. And so, if coming out of the surveillance saliva testing, there's no cause for further testing, you just get an email that says, thanks for participating in the surveillance testing. No further diagnostic testing is needed. Have a great day. If there's reason to have the diagnostic test, your daily health check pass goes red. You get scheduled into a confirmatory diagnostic test automatically as soon, same day or next morning. And then you get a call from either the University Health Service if you're student, or Wellness Center if you're staff or faculty, to make sure that all of that happens. So, but we filed last week our CLIA paperwork.
Cool.
And so we expect certainly at the latest at the beginning of January, we'll be operating under CLIA.
That's great.
And so will that mean that we'll get rid of the antigen testing and the swab commercial testing?
So, the university, we've got a couple different kinds, as you mentioned. There's the PCR nasal swab. We've got the rapid antigen. I understand there's another test coming online that we'll have available to us in the spring semester, and the saliva testing. And so we're thinking through how we want to use all of the different sort of platforms available to us. We'll certainly still be doing diagnostic testing. And so we're just sort of working through that right now about how we'll use those in combination.
Wow. Paul, you had mentioned, you touched on it, false positives, false negatives, and so forth. Can you explain these concepts?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the concept that false positive is, as it sounds, a positive when you're not actually positive. And for us, as I mentioned at the beginning, that was the real enemy going into this, especially when we're requiring everyone to get tested a couple times a week. We knew that we would not be able to tolerate kind of any degree of false positives. So we use the assay, as I mentioned, that amplifies three genes. So and as per Thermo Fisher, their false positive rate is less than 0.01%, meaning maybe less than 1 in 1,000 positives are a false positive. And then we also then retest from the original saliva tube. Every positive, we go back to that tube and retest before we put that result out. False negative, I mean, I think that is a little bit more of a misnomer. Every test has a limit of detection, right? So our saliva test is about 500 to 1,000 viral particles per milliliter, which is pretty close to the standard nasal swab test. If you have less than that, you won't be positive with the swab, you won't be positive with our saliva. So it's all about kind of the limit of detection. The antigen tests have even in many cases, markedly less sensitive. And that's why, you see some cases where people are negative. And we've seen it here when we have a few groups of people that we test with both, and they'll be positive by PCR, saliva, positive, and not till the 4th or 5th day will they be antigen positive. So we're big believers in the PCR test.
Yeah.
So just for our audience, can you talk a little bit about what causes a false positive, or how that happens?
I mean, like I said, in the PCR, it's, I think, extremely rare, and I think it would be more a contamination or a lab error. And that, where that's what we worry about, the saliva tube, and then it goes into plates and then read out by a machine. If that information connection has somehow been lost, that would be probably the most likely source. That's why we go back and retest individually that tube.
So I think we should do our last question before we take some from the audience.
I know we have so many good questions still. Which one do you want to do, Marianne?
How about if we just, if each of you could talk a little bit about what the universities, each of the universities learned, and what we can kind of take going forward.
Right.
You want to joust to see who goes first? Liz, you first.
So Notre Dame, I mean, learn that testing is really a key and important part of our overall strategy, right? Along with the masks and the distancing and the hygiene, but it's just a really key and important part. Learn that you have to just communicate and over communicate and help people understand why it's important to do all of these things. I learned that we have 50 student workers who staff our saliva collection, and they have been amazing, not only as part of the collection effort, but and helping improve that process, but they're ambassadors to talk with their fellow students about what testing is important. And so in my job in research administration, I don't always get to work with undergraduates in this way. So that's been a huge thing for me this semester as well, to be able to do that. We've really appreciated them. And then finally, just what the university can accomplish when people from all different parts, from research and administration and operations, all get together with a common goal. It was just amazing what we were able to accomplish.
Yeah, just I just want to highlight something and give a shout out to Mike Frender, Melissa Stevens, and Joanna McNulty. They were kind of leading that whole charge, and it's been an incredible process. Everybody working triple shifts. So
yeah, it's a great team.
Yeah, I think on our end, similar things. We've learned that frequent repeat testing with fast turnaround time can work. We've seen it here, drop positivity dramatically lower. But really, we found that we need to compel compliance with testing, and that we really need to educate people to isolate when they're positive. We had problems early on with students who are positive, not isolating. And, if that happens and you don't stop the spread, it's a huge effort. And so it takes a tremendous will. So I give Notre Dame a ton of credit for doing it. I mean, here there's several hundred people involved. The lab runs 3 8-hour shifts. They're working 24/7. And, I think they publicly announced that we've spent maybe 16 million on this through the course of the semester. So it's not easy or cheap.
But certainly, from this conversation, I mean, you've really amplified though what needs to happen though. The frequency of testing absolutely is essential. Doubling down on the communication, as Liz pointed out, and then the compelling of the testing. Yep. Really important messages for all of us here at the university, but also our audience. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, and the compelling of the quarantining or isolation. Heidi and I were talking one of our first sessions on people are having COVID parties, students having COVID parties, this kind of thing.
Paul, did you hear of that at Illinois, herd immunity parties?
Not that explicitly, but more just students kind of who were positive, not isolating and still going to parties. So I don't think the intent was malicious, but it was just, an educational moment for everyone.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I think we need to take a few questions. So Paul actually started to address this, but one question from John Tambari is, what's the approximate cost of the testing programs at ND and at Illinois for the semester overall? And so I think you just said 60 million. That's a lot.
16.
Oh, okay.
So we spend, at $10 a test and 70,000 tests a week. That's close to $1 million a week on testing. There's collection, there's all sorts of other things. So startup costs. So yeah, about 16 million is what they've said. But I think it's the cost of just having students be back and have in-person classes.
Yeah.
And do you know, Liz, about what we've spent at Notre Dame?
So our cost structure for the test itself is very much like Paul's, about $10, $11 a test, because we're using the same chemistry. We needed to equip the lab and the staffing. And so for just the saliva testing, we're a bit under $2 million. And then we've also got costs associated with our overall diagnostic testing center and all the commercial tests as well.
Yeah, it's hard to break it all down, but certainly the PCR testing itself is cheaper than sending out
Oh,
commercially.
yeah, way cheaper.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Here's a question from Natalie Myers. I'd like to hear more about opt-in testing any day of the week, like Paul referred to. At University of Illinois, could Paul comment on whether they have a test any day of the week provision, including staff? At Notre Dame, access to testing has been a concern for some on-campus staff, especially from high-traffic buildings with long open hours. Maybe Liz could comment to help staff there who sometimes question why professors teaching a couple hours a week. Anyway, so can staff just come and get testing whenever they want? I think.
Yep. Yeah, so the short answer is yes for us. Anybody with a university ID can go and get a test. They can get it. Some people get a test every day. And we thought about scheduling people early on. It just with 40,000 or whatever it is we have on this campus, not practical. So we have 20 different sites with 2 lines at each site. So we have basically 40 saliva collection stations from my office here. There's like 5 within a 5-minute walk. So it's there's never any line. So yeah, so it's 8 to 6 Monday through Friday and 10 to 3 on Saturday and Sundays. So it really is any day of the week, and it's faculty, staff, student. There's no differentiator between anybody with a university ID.
And Liz, are we going to move to that kind of model, or?
Yeah, we're looking to absolutely. So we've really been testing with the saliva testing for 2 months. And we started with a couple hundred tests a day, and we've moved to, as many as 1,300 tests a day. But during the winter session, and we're going to communicate about this tomorrow, we're going to move to more of a model of, come, and if you're in this group, please come on Tuesday. If you're in this group, please come on Friday. It would be great if everybody didn't come on the same day, so that's our challenge, is trying to spread it out a little bit, but we're moving to more of a just come test model as opposed to the, specific sort of invitation to come.
Liz, that's huge. There's Mary Ann and I hear about this from faculty and staff about that testing on demand. That it's going to be a huge positive.
Yeah,
that's great. That's great news.
Especially around the holidays, people wanting to visit.
Yeah, so during the winter, our focus is going to be on testing the folks that are working on campus and anyone living in community still, on campus during the winter break.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's very good. Okay, so I have another one, anonymous attendee, and this is for Paul. It's really not a question, but a comment. This is the comment. I follow the state numbers for COVID, and I noted today that the state of Illinois had a positivity rate of 9%. Region 6, which includes Champaign City, is 5.5%. However, when you take out Champaign City, the rate is 13.7 positivity. So I guess kudos to the University of Illinois testing methodology. I think he's saying great job. All right. Let's see. So I have one here that's a little bit confusing, but it's regarding an article in the Annals of Internal Medicine. And I know Eric Topol was one of the authors. I can't remember the other person, Oren maybe, where they went and they were looking at all these different studies of and looking for asymptomatic or symptomatic individuals, and coming up, some of them longitudinal, some not. And they didn't do any statistics. It was just basically a narrative. But they're saying that we really should test everyone, I think is the message that they're saying, because there's so many asymptomatics. But hopefully I'm getting this question correctly. The question is, what is the ethical reasoning for widespread testing based on an anecdote rather than statistics? So I guess this individual is suggesting that maybe that statistically testing everyone might not be ethical. What do you guys think about that?
That's a good question.
We're big believers in testing everybody. I think, you have to be able to do it in a way that is cost effective. So I think as you expand the circle, you probably have to go to something like pooling, need to have convenience for people. But I think testing everybody and testing everybody repeatedly has been shown in kind of these bubble type situations to drive down positivity dramatically lower.
Yeah, and I think that there's some evidence that, I mean, part of the problem is we don't know for sure how many are true asymptomatics that will never show symptoms. A lot of these are pre-symptomatic. It just depends on, like you said, you can test somebody on day 2 and they might be negative, and and eventually they get ill. But there's also some evidence that even people who don't show overt symptoms have some long-term issues. So that some, lingering effects that they didn't even notice. So I would say that those are good reasons or ethical reasons for testing as much as possible.
Marianne, could I ask a follow-up to both Liz and Paul? Have you gotten pushback from outside of the university in terms of compelling students to do this much testing? So have parents called and said, I don't believe in this, or any kind of that? Have you received any kind of pushback in that regard?
Mostly, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead.
We've had some parents ask questions. They're interested in the type of test we're doing, and wanting to know more information about even some of the details of the test, like our cycle threshold cutoffs and those kinds of things, as they're trying to assimilate all this information that's out there now about, and they want to know about false positives and false negatives and all of that. I wouldn't call it pushback. I think just trying to be as informed as they can about the process that the students are going through.
Yeah, I mean, mostly it's the opposite. I mean, people are very, we've heard stories of people transferring into our university for second semester, and the bars and restaurants here have adopted our app. The idea is that you want to be at a place that has a very low positivity, right? So,
Oh,
yeah.
Oh,
the bars,
Oh,
the app.
that's
You writing that down, Liz?
I am.
that's it. This is the price. This is the ticket price right here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's huge.
yeah.
That's huge. And here's the thing is that I think the media grabs hold of all the negative stuff. We're not going to compel people to do things and et cetera, et cetera. But here we find huge numbers of people who are interested in this. And as Liz pointed out, it's not that they're calling to get pushback, it's that they're calling to get informed. They just want to be in the know about what's happening with their kids on campuses. So
Right.
I really appreciate raising up this conversation. It's important. Yeah, because here in the media and stuff, this is what we're hearing. And so it's wonderful to hear the flip side of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent work. Wow. This has been a great conversation, you guys. Great conversation.
Let's take just a couple more questions.
Okay.
One is from Mark Horseman. In a system that can never be 100% effective, how are you generating metrics for success? How do measures of this feed back into screening redesign in your design, create, apply, assess cycle?
Yeah, it's a great question and something we think about a lot. I mean, I think one of our big ones going into it, I think we all know that the college students are actually, they don't get super sick most of the time, right? And of course here we haven't seen anybody have to go to the hospital, but a key thing is not spreading to the community. And unfortunately that has happened at other places. And as per our public health, that has not happened at all here because we've been able to keep it down. So that was a key one going into it. And then also just preventing and being able to put out these little outbreaks that might occur. So we have a whole target team where they see where the people are that are positive, and then we go in and we test those people 3 times a week. And so really being able to prevent those outbreaks at the very nascent stage, it's been critical, and that was a key criteria for us.
Wow.
So someone else asked about, is any of the testing data at either university being used for research purposes?
So we have a lot of data about from the daily health checks, and we've had some of our, as well as the testing data, and we've had some of our data scientists and computer scientists are looking at, people's compliance with testing, their compliance with daily health checks, what symptoms were most indicative. And so there's a lot of analysis going on right now around the data around our whole program, which has been really interesting. And we hope to further integrate that and use that to inform our mitigation program going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, similar.
All right, so we're coming to the end. I just had one more quick comment from our participants, and then we'll go into our lightning round. And this is from Courtney Thompson. And her comment is, what can ND do to get Paul to come back to Notre Dame? He is amazing. Thank you to him for all his work on behalf of all our students. Recruiting tool.
Yes. So let's do a quick lightning round. This is just a fun thing so that we get to know you guys just a little bit better. So I'll go first, and Liz, I will put this question to you first. What is your superpower?
Optimism.
Optimism. Paul?
That was Heidi's.
That's mine too. Paul, what's yours?
I don't know, persistent.
Clearly.
Yes, clearly. All right, the second one, Paul, what's the last show you binged and loved?
I mean, my wife and I are watching the Queen's Gambit right now.
Oh, that's really good.
Mhm.
Finish that. Liz?
Lock and Key with my 13-year-old.
I watched that one too. It was so good. It was great. So entertaining. Okay, question 3. Liz, what is your most treasured possession?
My Kindle e-reader.
And Paul?
I don't know. I would just say my family, I guess.
That's a nice
Okay,
answer.
maybe a little more original. Paul, what's your favorite meal?
Rocco's Pizza.
Ah! Me too.
Good
the
answer.
Combo. Rocco's combo.
Liz?
Any meal where I have all my kids there.
Oh. And then finally, Liz, what are you deeply grateful for right now?
My family, strong coffee, and good internet, in that order.
And Paul?
I think just science. I mean, I think not just testing, but vaccine in record time, figuring out how it spread. I mean, science will ultimately triumph. It's going to be dark days for a few months, but I think science is the way out of this.
Great. I love
Awesome way
that.
to end it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us and instructing us and informing our audience. I really, really appreciate it. And for all the participants, please take anything you learned and pass it off to your friends and family. And if you have any rumors or questions that you want us to address on future shows, please email us at consider@nd.edu. And I'd like to alert everyone of a special live streaming event that starts at 8:30 tonight, where Lou Nani will be hosting Father Jenkins to discuss the conclusion of the fall semester, and he'll be offering a Thanksgiving blessing. So if you're interested, you can find that at giving.nd.edu/watch. So we hope you turn in next week when we'll be discussing COVID and food security with Jim Conklin, the president and co-founder of Cultivate Food Rescue, and Mary Jo Martinek, I think that's how you say her name, the CEO of Food Bank of Northern Indiana. So consider this: the more you know, the more good you can do.
So be informed and act on accurate information.
And share reliable information with others.
Until next week, be kind and give grace to each other. Bye, everybody.
Thanks again.
Thank you, guys.